Hello there, and welcome to our first set of notes for Unit 4, which has to deal all with sensation and perception. So this is probably one of my favorite units because we get to look at things about like optical illusions and different tricks that our mind can play on us having to do with our senses. So it's really important thus far that you remember the brain structures that are involved in sensation and perception. But really we're talking about the things that happen in our external world and how our brain processes those. So here's a quick little thing we'll come back to, but we'll be looking at some different optical illusions and talking about them, what they have to do with sensation and perception. So if you just stare at this picture for a minute, right now you're sensing the different colors that are here, and then you could or might be perceiving a picture in it. Okay, so we'll come back to that one. But really what we're talking about with the sensation and perception are these 5 different senses that we have so that you might be familiar with. So vision, taste, smell, touch, hearing. Remember that these 4 right here, or at least these 3 here that we've already talked about, go to your cortex. So our visual cortex, our auditory cortex, our somatosensory. And that smell is the only one that we talked about that bypasses the cortex and goes straight to your brain. So these 3 right here go to the thalamus, doesn't bypass your brain. These these go through the thalamus while smell does not. All right, so let's start on some definitions. So sensation. Sensation is really, I want you to think sensation is sensing. So a process by which our sensory receptors and our nervous system receive and represent stimulus energy. Ooh, stimulus energy. So I want you to think of a stimulus can be any one of these 5 different senses. So a stimulus or stimulus energy can be sight, can be smell, can be hearing, can be anything there's energy coming into our body and we are sensing it. Versus perception, this is what our brain does with it. So this is our brain processing and organizing all those senses that are coming in and making it, this is where I want you to focus here, meaningful as far as objects and events. I like to think of this kind of like a baby when they are developing. When babies develop, because they don't have this idea of perceiving yet, they're really just a lot of sensations coming in. So they can see things, they can hear things, but because they don't have any way of like organizing or making things meaningful, they're not perceiving a lot. All right, versus you right now are taking things in. You're seeing the screen in front of you. You're hearing my voice. You might be able to feel, I don't know, think about like your clothes touching you right now. Those are all senses, all right? You might smell your mom cooking dinner. And then you perceiving that as you taking all those things and making it meaningful or being able to make meaning out of it. Okay, so there's 2 ways we sense the world around us. The first one is called bottom-up processing, and the second one is called top-down. So I'm going to show you this picture really quick. Okay, so here is a picture. I just want you to look at it, and then we're going to come back to that one as well. So bottom-up processing would be taking that picture that I just showed you and analyzing it beginning with the sense receptors. So starting with just looking at it, and then working up to the brain's integration of sensory information. Okay, so bottom up is really just looking at a picture and taking in the senses. Versus the top-down processing is where my processing is guided by a higher level mental process. So it's not just taking in sensation, taking in sight or smell or hearing, but it's actually guided by my cortex and going down. So as when we construct perceptions drawing on our experiences and expectations. Okay, so this is where it's going from top down, from my cortex down. This is where it's going from my senses up. So now let's go back to this picture. So bottom up processing, if I'm just looking at this picture, I see black and white, I see like there's blobs somewhere. Versus if I told you to look at this picture and look for the cow. Now my brain is looking or trying to make sense of this as a cow. So I have a perceived notion, and now I'm looking to find it. So if you see the cow already, that's great. But if not, like here's his 2 ears, and here's his eyes, and here's his nose. That would be top-down processing. Look for the cow. Versus the bottom-up is just the senses coming in, and oh my gosh, I see a cow. all right? If you don't see the cow, pause it, all right? Here is the next one. So again, just taking in all of these different things, the color changes. So our sensories and perception work together to help us make sense of our world. We're trying to like take these complex things and make them fit somewhere in our brain. So here's another one. Look for faces. Okay, so if I'm just taking in this, I might just look at it as a forest, but if it's a top down, I just say look for faces. So there's a face right here in the rocks. There's a face right here. There's a face right here. The face right here. This is a painting called The Forest Has Eyes. Here's another fun one. This is called How Many Wolves Can You See? So top-down processing, I'm looking for wolves. So I'm trying to find pictures of wolves in this. I see one, right, our obvious wolf, but can you find the other faces of the wolves? Go ahead and pause it and look for them. Okay, so now we need to talk about our different senses though. So there's some basic principles that guide our sensation, because sensation is really just, like I said before, this energy and how we perceive it. So psychophysics, this is taking the physics of these sensations and talking about what they have to do with our thought process, so our psyche, our inside our brain. So it's the relationship between the physical characteristics like a light wave or vibrations in the air or smells, and then what it has to do with our psychological experience of them. So the light would be the physics part. The brightness would be our psychological experience. Sound is the physics. How loud or soft it is, our volume, that's our psycho part. Pressure in the terms of weight. Taste in the forms of sweetness. Okay, now we have some, so what you'll need to know for the exam is we have something called a sensation threshold. So sensation threshold, there's two different things you'll have to know about thresholds. The first one is an absolute threshold. The second one is a difference threshold. So absolute threshold is, you need to know it's the minimum stimulation needed to detect a stimulus 50% of the time. So that's how we define it. So 50% of the time I can hear it, I can see it, I can smell it, I can taste it. All right? There are light waves out there, waves out there that we can't see. There are sounds that we can't hear. There are smells we cannot smell. They still exist, but we can't sense them. So all of these different sensations, we have something called an absolute threshold. The amount that's going to cause a stimulus or you to be able to perceive it 50% of the time. The difference threshold is once I do sense something, it's how much it has to change in order for me to be able to tell a difference. So this is called the GND, or the just noticeable difference. And these are actually calculated for the majority of our senses. Okay, so how much difference there has to be between two stimulus required to sense a detection. So this could be two different types of light, looking at which one's brighter, two different sounds, all right? So 50% of the time, notice a difference called the GND. So here are some GNDs for your senses. So absolute threshold, that's how much I need to be able to sense it. The difference, so my absolute thresholds, so sorry, this is just talking about absolute, this slide. This is for our vision. So we can see a candle flame at 30 miles on a clear night. We can hear the tick of a watch 20 feet away. We can feel a bee's wings, like that, falling on your cheek from about 1 centimeter. And smell, we can smell or sense a drop of perfume in about a 3-room apartment, and a teaspoon of sugar in 2 gallons of water. That's a lot of water. All right, so here's some slides that go through that. So 30 miles away, a flame, that's how good our vision is. All right, tick of a watch, 20 feet away. 2 gallons of water and a teaspoon of sugar, we're able to taste that. A drop of perfume, and I think of like a 3-bedroom house, and then a bee's wing falling a centimeter. Now, there's some things that affect these absolute thresholds, and this is called the signal detection theory, and this is where we'll end today. But the signal detection theory is really talking about there are situations in which you are more in tune or more likely to hear, to see, to smell, or to sense something. Okay, so it predicts how and when we're going to detect the presence of a stimulus amid background stimulation. Now, this assumes that there's no single absolute threshold, meaning that you can see a flame from a tower far away, 30 miles away, 50% of the time. But this is assuming that our thresholds change depending on these four things, okay? So on experience, expectations, motivations, and how tired you are, your level of fatigue. So I want you to think about this because you'll probably be like a personal experience. Think about your cell phone's message, okay? So your cell phone makes a sound when you get a text message. Now, when you are aware of the sound that it makes, so your experience of what the sound is when you get a text message, you're more likely to hear it, all right? When you are expecting someone to message you, you are more likely to hear it. Have you ever had that where it's like you'll be listening to music and you're expecting a text message from your friend on something really important that happened at school that day, and you're kind of like you're tuned in to hear that text message, you are more likely to hear it. Versus maybe you're listening to music, you're not expecting a text message, and your mom texts you, and you look at your phone an hour later and you're like, oh, how did I not hear that? Okay, the sound was the same, right? It was the same loudness. You just didn't hear it because you weren't expecting it. All right, your motivation. If you're expecting a text message from someone you like, if you're really motivated to hear something, you are more likely to hear it. And then always how tired you are has effect on this threshold. So really the signal detection theory, going back to that, is that the absolute threshold can change depending on these four things. How experienced you are with it, if you're expecting it to happen, how motivated you are to it happen. Maybe you know your mom's gonna text message, but you don't really care because you're not motivated to care, and then how tired you are. All right. Our next one, we're going to talk about some interesting phenomenon with signal detection theory.